Hi, ladies. Thank you for watching. Welcome to the Tell the Truth, Own Your Identity series. Today we are with Flora. She's going to share her story of identity and truth. So without further ado, here is Flora.
Hi, hello. My name is Flora. I am the founder and CEO of Courage Dolls, as well. I also work with a large retailer doing focus on African American marketing strategies. So that's kind of a bit about myself as well.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about where you're from and a little bit about your journey to owning your identity.
Yeah, so I'm initially from East Orange, New Jersey, for the Jersey folks. I currently now live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, due to work. But my family, I'm a first generation American. My mother is from the Caribbean and Grenada, as well as my father is from Nigeria. And so my family right now is back in Jersey. My brother as well, while I'm here on the Midwest. And so that played a very big, much growing up, especially, that played a very big role in kind of this sense of building my identity and embracing my cultural heritage. Like I always say, I have like the best of both worlds, having the Caribbean and African side, really in terms of growing up in a household where it was very much encouraged to really just have books, have knowledge, have the historical context to know kind of where you came from, just to know where you're going. And so for me growing up, I was always just exposed to this different range of culture and food and music that just always stuck with me. And I went to school in Jersey, but then decided to go to college in California. So I decided to up and leave the East Coast and go to Pepperdine University, where I did my undergrad in advertising and marketing. And it was always an area that just interested me because of this idea of, I thought advertising and marketing was a very interesting way to connect with consumers, to connect with audiences and create powerful messages, but also it also can distort kind of what people see of themselves or not. And so it was something that intrigued me. So going to college, and then on top of that, I also studied abroad for a year in China. So it went even further, went from the East
We're
Coast
everywhere.
to the West Coast. And then on top of that, I went to California. I'm sorry, I went to China and very much spent a year there in Shanghai and had an opportunity to see such a different culture from my own that I had never experienced, but truly embrace a new language. Learning Mandarin was a language I didn't know prior, but took classes, and as well as had the opportunity to explore other countries like Indonesia and Vietnam, Cambodia, other places. And it was the first time there that I voted. So when I voted absentee, I voted while I was in China. So seeing Obama get elected while I was abroad was something very intriguing because it gave a different perspective
Yeah.
of society. But then after that, after I graduated, came back to the US, graduated college, and then, worked my backgrounds in advertising and marketing, especially multicultural marketing, which I've done for a couple years. And for me, diversity and inclusion has been such an important key element of what I care about, really uplifting communities of color. And I think as well that ties to my kind of going to your second question about this idea of confidence. For me, because I was seeing such a lack of marketing or seeing much positive messaging that are really reflective of us and reflective of us in positive ways. I very much wanted to work in spaces and at companies and work on campaigns and work that really focused on narratives that positioned us in a positive light and positioned us in ways that weren't just stereotypes or marketing and campaigns that wasn't just one lens. So that also led me in between all of that, kind of jumping around my story, but in between all of that as well, and I hope to answer it more clearly in a bit. In the midst of all of that as well, I launched a multicultural doll and book company focused called Courage Dolls, which was centered around encouraging girls of color to be unstoppable. So going to this notion even further of having not just marketing that are reflective of communities of color and positive positive ways, but also products. And as young kids are building their imagination and this idea of building their identity, having truly products that reflect who they are and represent powerful and encouraging stories was something that as well was important to me. So this idea of confidence building and with others, but also in the day-to-day work that I do, but also this idea of me wanting to see more representation and positive representation and wanting to instill on myself, but also making products and making work that was that for other communities too.
Yeah, I love it. I love just like you're dedicating yourself to creating other, other, what's the word, other representation of Black women and Black girls just throughout the world. With having an experience of different cultures, how do you feel like that kind of affected you as a Black woman, whether you were in China or, on the West Coast or to where you are now?
Yeah, I think especially being in China, in a country that very much doesn't have many people of color. It's predominantly a homogenous culture. And when I went there, did I probably, that was one of the first big instances where realizing like, okay, I am like this other, I guess you want to say, this realization of like, I see myself visually and no one in a mile looks remotely like me. And I had braids at the time. And I remember walking down the street one day to go to this grocery store, and I didn't know much Mandarin yet. And this woman comes up to me, and she's basically this older woman speaking in Mandarin. She's like, "Pia Liang, Pia Liang." I think that was the word. If I'm butchering my Mandarin, I apologize. I haven't heard it in a while. But the phrase that she was saying was like, beautiful, beautiful. The hair was beautiful, but she was touching it. And so remember, just imagine just walking down the street, minding your own business, and a random person comes up to you and is touching your hair. And my friend, she explained what was going on, and I was like, okay, great. That she said, but I'm glad she thinks it's pretty, but don't touch my hair. Right. And then, she explained to me just this cultural difference of like, them not necessarily seeing many people of color, especially Black people there, not, this idea of that cultural lens of boundaries was something that wasn't as used to. And so over time I got used to it. I got called Oprah a lot. And so I very much got to be, I'm sure right now I'm in a lot of Chinese families, mantles in their living rooms with like holding their babies and taking photos.
Have you taken photos?
Yeah, at first it was very awkward and weird for me. And over time, seeing like, okay, a random person is gonna stare and take a photo of me. I'm like, okay, let me get my celebrity status on, and just got used to it. So that was probably when I like really was like, okay, either like at first I was like, get away from me, this is freaking me out, it made me uncomfortable. But as I got to know the culture more and got to just talk with you and got to learn a bit more of the Mandarin language and just understanding like, hey, for the most part, it wasn't something that was trying to be this negative lens. It was like, okay, these people, a lot of the communities I was walking into, we just never had interacted much with Black people. And granted, I had to tell people to back off touching my hair as often. It was like, back off touching my hair. But it did give me this perspective of being in a place and being one of the very, very few, and just also dealing with another culture in that. So coming into my own Black identity and being like, okay, like I felt like a celebrity over time. And when I came back to the States, it was like, no one's taking photos of me. In a positive way. No one's thinking it was like a celebrity. And so I'll just go back to just existing. It wasn't bad, but it was just like,
it's a different experience.
To being like, oh wow, okay, I feel like a celebrity, even though I'm not Oprah. But I will take this confident building of feeling like I'm Oprah, or any other Black female is Oprah. And then kind of just like getting used to that for a while, but just understanding another culture.
Absolutely. That was actually my next question, how it affected you going back to the States. When you were in China and, it's kind of like a confidence boost. Did it really affect you, how you viewed yourself when you came back to America?
When I came back to America, like I was saying, when I came back to America and realized that like no more photos were being and like this idea of okay, just calm down, go back to just living your day. It was something that was, but it gave me a lens of being like in another culture that was so different from my own, being not just recognized, but being like, I wouldn't say like celebrated for my blackness, more so just like they thought I was a celebrity, because they probably think any black person they see is a celebrity, but I'll take that. And then coming back to the States, where it was just like, okay, you feel ignored. You feel just like an afterthought. It was just like, it was probably a moment, even now saying it, that I look back on and realize how much of a difference it was in terms of consistently being recognized, not being recognized like I was going to steal something, not being recognized, but just being recognized for the sense of just like, this, you're exotic, or whatever someone wants to say. And then coming back here and just being like, oh, like, okay, move out the way, you're being ignored, you're an afterthought, so on and so forth. I think it's still, there's don't get me wrong, there's definitely racism in China. There's quite a bit of racism, and there's advertising that I saw that portrayed Black identity, like either when there was ads like really like showing really dark skin as being something that's like, we got to wash this away, like similar to those, like there's, for instance, there was an ad that ran a couple years ago in Asia. I'm not sure if it was China, but somewhere in Asia, where this woman was doing laundry, and I think it was an Asian woman doing laundry, and then it was a Black male at first who was, I think she put him in the washer. I'm butchering, but she put him kind of, I think, in the washer, and he was supposed to represent dirtiness, like dirt. He comes out of the washer, and he's actually, I think, like his skin is pale, it's like white, and the ad was to represent this idea of like Blackness being dirty and Blackness being unclean. Similar to, you think of those campaigns years ago that showed soap brands in the US and those caricatures of Black people as like rubbing this dirt off your skin, which is your Black identity, as a way to be quote unquote clean. And so there are still products and advertising in those regions that were reflecting that. So there was absolutely that I saw that I had a lot of issues with. But for the most part, my interaction there was just this idea of like, I've never seen someone who looks like it, let alone your hair. And then coming back here was just more so like, okay, it wasn't necessarily like a confidence deflated, but more so just like, oh, I just see this drastic difference of like, being put quote unquote on this pedestal to being like, okay, you're just like, you're in the background, you're
That's so interesting how just like, I don't know, Western culture and just different countries, how we can be portrayed in different lights. When was that moment when you're like, I need to, you know, you realize the lack of representation, but you felt like you needed to add to that to help?
Yeah. So for me, you're asking, when did I realize that?
Yeah, when did you realize it?
In general, or to specifically that situation, or in general?
I mean, in general, just in
general.
general.
You know, I was in high school and watched this experiment called the doll test, which was initially done in the 1940s. And this test was done to study the effects of segregation on young children of color. And the test, which was initially done, where they had a group of Black children, were given a white, and a group of white children as well, but they were given a Black doll and a white doll, and the children were asked questions such as, which doll is prettier, smarter, more likely to succeed, so on and so forth. And the children overwhelmingly were choosing the white doll when it came to anything positive, and the Black doll when it came to anything negative. And so when I watched that test, it was done 60 years later. It was initially done in the 1940s. I watched it in high school when another female recreated the test, and it had the similar results, and it was just so disheartening. And to see, granted, all these years, we're now in the 21st century, and these young children at like 4 and 5 years old, who similarly had this sense of low self-esteem, and another form of internalized racism, feeling as if they themselves weren't good enough, and that after all these years later, you would have thought, or to some degree think that, okay, is there more positive images out there? Is there more products that really reflect and represent positively in narratives, children of color? And when these children were just like, I still choose the white doll when it comes to positive attributes, and a Black doll, it was a moment that I realized, it was a moment that just forever stuck with me, even though I was in high school. I didn't know at the time what I wanted to do with that realization or with that information. But it was just like, even though I had an opportunity to grow up with having dolls with different identities, like I said, having this, cultural background, this enriching cultural background of my heritage, but also being exposed to, well, as I got older, I got exposed to some cultures, but it was just like, wow. And it made me think like, man, when a child has a toy, especially when they're building their imagination, it's also about what is, as they're building their, early development, what are those stories and narratives and products that really reflect them in a great way. And when I thought of, just for instance, dolls, especially the impact it has on young girls, I couldn't think of many. I thought of dolls that were, the Barbies that were either predominantly white, or if they were a doll of color, they were just painted black and there you go. Yeah. Or there was predominantly homogenous options where the doll features were still, a small, thin brim nose, thin lips, green eyes, this long, like blondish hair, and a black doll. And there wasn't authentic stories. And then when I thought about book stories, predominantly thought of the American Girls of the world, where if you remember, like Addie, we had the Addie growing up,
Right,
the one. Years later is when I realized that she was a runaway slave. I didn't realize that.
I did too, not too long ago. It was
right?
On Facebook.
Right? And you're just like, well, I was like, Mom, this was the one doll. So I get it. You had very limited options. And it sucks, but being that was the option, and it just happens to be the runaway slave. And so not necessarily much narratives and stories that were really uplifting and empowering and reflective of girls of today. And so for me, as I went on through, high school, college, I went to grad school as well, like it was really this time of just like, it had an opportunity to intern at a toy, some toy companies, like Jack Specific and Hasbro, working in multicultural advertising and marketing, and just like really still seeing, even though when I'm talking to grad school, that I decided I'm like, okay, I want to take this genuine time to still have this thought with me about this company. I still have this idea, and I still haven't seen much transformation in the toy industry and toy aisles. And so for me, that moment when I was in high school was a catalyst for really just like, okay, I want to change that narrative, and I want to create something on the market that I haven't seen, and for kids, and especially young girls of color, to be able to see and build their confidence with.
Yes, I love that, because I think sometimes we'll talk about it, we won't do anything about it. So the fact that you actually took action and do it is just so amazing.
Yeah.
When you were growing up as a young girl, do you feel like you had that representation or a lot of influential Black women around you to provide that for you?
So I think the biggest, like I've always gravitated to just like amazing Black women to find as mentors, or to find like as just in terms of encouraging voices, like my mom being the first and foremost one. And then one of my amazing neighbors, Caroline, she passed away a couple years ago, but she was someone that, Carolyn, should I say, she worked, for the United Nations, and she focused on empowerment of young girls. And she was just a rock star who was so unapologetic and authentic in who she was. And I didn't know what that really meant as a young child, but she was always basically about like, embrace who you are. Like she was always wearing like dashikis and an Afrocentric look and feel before it became even popular, now it's more popular than today. And, throughout high school and college, like, always typically had a female mentor who was a Black woman, and just gravitated to either my professors who were in those spaces, or gravitating if I was a part of, mentoring organizations. Like I tried to very much was like, hey, I had an opportunity to really be around and have the fortunate opportunity and the privilege to be around some amazing Black women who either I just tried to gravitate to and learn from them, or just get advice from them and guidance. And so for me, mentoring became more important about how did I pay that forward. And so like throughout my years as well, I've mentored especially young Black girls, because I feel like a lot of times Black girls, especially because I think Black girls at times get left behind in a conversation when it comes to education, when it comes to like we are the backbone of society. I feel backbone, the culture, commerce, community, but we endure a lot. And having other Black females and young Black girls, even if you're on your journey, supporting the next Black girl is so, so important. And so for me, being able to have that growing up was something that I was like, no matter what I do, I want to continue that as I get older, and continue to just like, whether I'm in my job, mentoring other young Black females who are starting off at work, or with my company, like, I always seek out and especially work with other Black women, like in terms of, can I find a supplier? Can I find a marketing partner? I always specifically try to look first for Black women.
Yeah. Have to just give it back, like you said, to pay it forward.
Yeah.
With you being surrounded by so many inspirational Black women, I can only imagine how much confidence you had as a young girl. Was there a time that you kind of struggled with self-love and confidence as a Black young girl or a Black woman?
Oh, absolutely. Even having amazing Black women where I could find them, like it's very much always, it's still to this day, this journey of really being assured and confident in who I am. Like, growing up like as a heavyset girl, growing up as a Black female, period, in society. When I was growing up, it was very much like, okay, you're surrounded by either other girls who have these like long, beautiful hair or really thin. And then you're seeing things in the media about like, this is what the look and feel is supposed to be, right? And then I was like, well, like I was more of a bit of a tomboy. Like I liked playing video games with my brother and did not in any way, shape or form like wearing, makeup, didn't like wear stockings. So I hated wearing dresses. And so I was just like, I don't like the color pink as much. And so that's nothing to do with it. I mean, like things that you would traditionally associate with, I guess, growing up, traditionally what society says has to be deemed more feminine. I didn't necessarily fit that bill. And so for me, being either surrounded by friends who would either get attention more so from guys and I wasn't, or the idea of, hey, I am a plus size girl growing up. And so navigating, like feeling confident if I'm going to the beach or if I'm going in a swimsuit or things of that nature. And it was very much just like, okay, this idea of the body image. I think like body image probably played a very big thing growing up in terms of like questioning my confidence and then at times questioning my value. Wow. Because if somebody else was getting all this attention, like, I'm like, okay, I feel like, like, I'm a smart person, like I'm funny, I'm this and that, but like not, and growing up as a young girl, if you think, or one society deems to think that like that's what high value is deemed by, like who you can get attention from, which is a distorted view. But like that needs to change. But that's what I felt. And, very much got always the love and support from my family and had amazing friends who genuinely were just, I never felt like I had catty friends. And the girls, we all get catty with each other, but never really felt this idea of like competition. Or didn't feel this idea of like, oh my goodness, if you did, like, there was one time where even the sense of like colorism, like I don't consider myself to be like, oh, I'm this like very light-skinned person. Like I never deemed that. The one guy, I remember he was basically catcalling myself and my friend. And then he was basically just like, oh, like, I'm trying to get at the light-skinned one. And he was talking to me because my other friend, she's darker melanin. And I was just like, wait, what? Like, that was my first interaction, I think. Yeah. I was probably like, maybe 13. And that was my first, that, as I remember now, my first interaction of remembering just a moment of colorism.
Yeah.
And this idea of like, well, I was like, well, no, like we're all Black here. Like what, like,
right.
At the end of the day,
what are you talking about?
Right? These white people gonna see us as me. like we're all Black. If something goes down, we're all getting in trouble.
At the end of the day, yeah.
So they're all gonna think that it's like, but it was, I think, more so growing up as a child and growing up in terms of thinking about my body and thinking about this idea of acceptance and associating that with this idea of value was something that I think was very distorted. And as I got older, after a couple of years later, I was working at this company where my leader at the time, like I was, working on African American marketing strategy, working on really focusing on creating campaigns and strategies, really targeting and uplifting Black communities, really excited for it, more so coming into my own authentic truth. But I had a leader who very much was just like, okay, this is your role. Like, if I would, like, he didn't necessarily understand the Black community, let alone didn't necessarily care to. He was like, he just saw this audience as a number. Yeah. And I was like, well, we need to do some more research and understand like who this community is. Like, we need to think more deep, because I said Black people are not just dark-skinned white people. Like, like they're not like, we need to go deeper, because they, similarly to other communities, as every other community, there's values, there's shared values, there's nuances, there's different attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, like, but I want to make sure that we're doing marketing that is really being thoughtful and culturally relevant and contextually relevant, not just like, hey, we can just throw a Black person in a quick ad and swap it out and good to go and think that's going to be enough. And so him and I butted heads quite a bit. And he, over time was very much like, well, Flora, I know you come from a creative advertising background, but I need you to just be like this. Like, we would have statuses, and he would always basically tell me like, well, Flora, like, I know you're interested in kind of, going into this deeper on this body of work, but I need you only to do this. And I was like, well, I am doing that, but here's another angle we'll let to look. He's like, no. Or he'll be like, well, Flora, sometimes people who are of the identity of the work they do can get very emotional. Or he would say things like, oh, I'm like, he's like,
really?
Yeah, it's like, really, like him and I, like, but, and then he just started to exclude me off a lot of meetings. Like, I was like, okay, maybe let me not ask questions. Let me not try to think of new innovative ways that we could, like, build onto this work. Let me, after time, I was like, okay, if him and I are disagreeing a lot, let me just conform myself and fit into this box of what he wants me to do. So more so what he wants me to be, not even do, but be, which was more like him. And it started to become very, very stressful. And it started to become very stressful because I was very much starting to devalue myself and starting to reduce my confidence. And this idea of like, man, now I feel really awkward to question him. I feel like I'm working even more hours and he doesn't even notice when I'm trying. Like, I'm trying to connect with other partners at the company and be like, hey, how can I get support and guidance? And he would just push me out of meetings. He would just be like, Flora, like, I don't think you're right for this team, all these things. And I was like, okay, let me just try to change more to fit what he wants. And it starts to impact my health. Like, I started over time to realize that I was like losing a lot of weight really fast. And I was starting to feel very lethargic and feel very stressed. And I would come home after working so many hours and just feel like I can't do anything. I started to feel depressed. Yeah. And like, I didn't, there's times where you feel stressed or things of that nature, but I never felt to a moment where like, I feel like depressed. And so one day I went to the doctor and she was just doing some blood work and everything. And then she said, Flora, like, are you by chance like stressed? Have you been feeling stressed lately? And that was the first time I ever admitted to a doctor, like, yes, I am. Like, I am feeling stressed. And then they ran some more tests and realized that I had hyperthyroidism. Wow. And then also like thyroid, and now realizing the thyroid controls, definitely get your health check. Your thyroid controls a lot of your body. It controls so many things. And my mom has had hyperthyroidism in the past too. But it was this idea of stress, but not taking care of myself. And, one of my closest coworkers, she would see me all the time. She's like, Flora, like, something is not, you're not smiling the way you used to, like, something is very different. And, eventually I was like, once I found out I had hyperthyroidism, eventually they were like, the best case scenario, I was on some medication, but it wasn't working. So I ended up doing surgery to remove my thyroid. But it was when I decided, when I was like, you know what, after I did the surgery, because that was my first time ever doing surgery, I said to myself, like, I said, God, like, I honestly was taking time away from you. I was also putting so much energy into the job and focusing on someone who I shouldn't have put all this energy in, who made me feel devalued. And I was thus devaluing myself. And I said, never again do I want to allow someone to devalue me in that way again, and allow myself to be so far away from just like who I am, embracing my authentic self, but also truly like working on my emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being. And so that surgery happened in February of last year. And it was a time that it was, because being in Minnesota, it snows a lot in the winter. And I had this surgery February 1st, 2019, and my mom stayed with me for a couple weeks, and I couldn't talk. Like once I came from the surgery and came home, I basically couldn't speak for 3 weeks, and I'm someone who talks a lot. And so being able to lean into the silence a bit more and leaning in more into just quietness and thoughtfulness of my mom. There were things that I saw that my mom was doing that I never really realized before, because I was moving around or talking, but she would start every morning off like with some daily prayer, and then she'll do a crossword puzzle, and then she'll start her day off. And so for me, I was like, how can I start to input some routines to get my day started in a way that's calming and relaxing? No, whether the day's going to be hectic or crazy, but there were just things I started to notice, that how can I start to change my life in a way that isn't just like, God, I just need to work on myself, but also what routines do I need to be putting in place in my life to get that serenity and calmness?
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. I love that you mentioned just like, well, just sharing your story, it kind of shows us that from how you feel about yourself also affects your health.
Yeah.
In building and uplifting yourself and getting better health wise, how do you feel like, I'm trying to figure out how to formulate the question. In what ways did just building mental health and physical health, how did that contribute to how you felt about yourself? Did it uplift your self-worth?
Yeah. So one of the things that I was, starting to implement, like once that time frame when like I said, when I lost my voice and I couldn't talk and everything was just more so like, how do I express myself and I can't speak. But one of the things I started to implement was like, okay, I want to practice, like I was attending church, but I wasn't necessarily like an avid member, like I felt like I was more of a passive member versus more of the proactive member.
Yeah.
Meaning that, go to church, do some involvement here, but I was like, you know what, like I need to work on definitely being more involved. Like I'm, I don't have any family in Minnesota. I'm the only one of my family that lives out here. And so I have friends and everything, but I don't have family here. And so for me, my church family has been a very big supportive system for me. And so, one thing I was involved with for a while was being our choir director, our worship team director for a little bit. But then, I was kind of still doing it somewhat passively. And then I was like, you know what, let me start to get more involved. So when I started going back to church more, even when I didn't have my voice yet, I couldn't necessarily sing, but just meeting, I was just like, you know what, let's work. I, knew our group was made up of different generations, people who were either the same age as me and then a millennial age, to people who were retired. And I was just like, you know what, how do we build community? And I love that our pastor, he was creating, as for the new year, he wanted it to focus on this idea of one team, and knowing that teams can be made up of very different people with different thoughts and opposing views or perspectives, but how do you really work together? And so I wanted to really work on that as well for myself, but most importantly as well with our choir group. And so like we did something that, we hadn't done before, which I guess wouldn't seem as a big deal, but I said, hey, let's have a day where we do a quote unquote offsite. And we basically, spend a couple hours with each other. And we literally work on like, what are the things that we want to accomplish this year as a group? Like, what are things we don't want to see anymore? What are things we do? How has it been with previous directors? How has it not been? Like, are there songs that maybe you're like, how do we worship and spend more time with each other, even outside of this church building? Because if we're only doing that in this building, like I believe, the church is a central focus point, but it's, the people who really make the church. And so even if we're not in this building, how are we connecting? And so, and I said, give me definite feedback. What are things I'm not doing great that I could be doing better as a director? What are things you want to? So we did planning for hours. We spent the day really just like getting to know each other. And I was probably the newest member at the church, even though I was a choir director, but I was one of the newest members. And there are people there who didn't know things about each other. even though they were sitting across each other in pews for years.
Wow.
And one thing, so one thing we started implementing was like, okay, we're going to have these type of hour practices every once a month. At the end of every month, we're going to have a touch base with each other, and we're going to do fellowship at someone's house. So instead of singing and practicing in a church, we're going to do it in someone's home. So everyone each month had to volunteer their home, whether it was an apartment, whether it was a house, or we maybe once in a while we'll book a restaurant, just book a little room, and we'll do fellowship. But it was a way to like get out of the church, but also get to know each other more.
Yeah.
And I started to really feel like one team. And then so that was one thing. And then just getting more involved, and now working with my church further as we're trying to work as well in like the youth, and knowing that there is a reduction of youth who are feeling connected to the church. And as someone who is a millennial, like, who understands that, but like, talking with our church elders and talking with people in our church choir, like, how can we help in supporting this? Like, what can we be doing? And how to, so those are things working on there. And I think health wise, like for me, one of the things that I was doing when I started to slowly get a little bit better when I was recovering from my surgery was, before I used to do this cardio kickboxing kind of class, and then like I couldn't clearly do it after surgery. So it started to morph into this really slow Tai Chi part, like because I couldn't move, but I still wanted to like, get some
Workout
training. And so while my mom when she was here, would just do crosswords, puzzles, I'll try to like, do some small exercises. And then I was like, okay, once I started to get better, was like, I really want to change up, what I was eating as well. And so like, cutting back on like breads, adding more home cooking and meals, like invested in Instapot, and really focusing on like making more home meals, or making sure I had this level of vegetables day in, day out. And then as well, I just bought a yoga mat for the first time. I don't do yoga, but I bought a yoga mat. And so and then just like, being in Minnesota, like in Minneapolis, maybe people who are not from Minnesota may not know this, but they have the most beautiful lakes. It's a land of 10,000 lakes. And so everywhere you go, there's a lake. And so it's a great place to just walk around and kind of take advantage of the beautiful nature. And then thirdly, just practicing every morning, especially this year, I was like, every morning I want to make a commitment to open up my Bible app, read some scripture. If I can, write down something. If not, just like at least take like 2 minutes to meditate. And so and there's some days that are better than others, some days not as good as others, but those were some of the things that I was like, how do I really just take the time? And then I think fourthly, when I come home from work and I just want to take a break from everything, whether it be business, career, I just watch The Office on Netflix.
I love The Office.
To recharge. That's how I recharge, when I just don't want to pay attention to anything else.
What advice would you have for a woman who is looking to find ways to build confidence within herself and kind of own who she is?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I think for women who are looking to build or on their journey, I think it's probably more so a journey. It never ends. You can be 80 years old and still building confidence. You could be 10 years old and probably have the most confidence than anyone I've ever seen. And so I think having us as women understand it's a journey, that it's not something that I feel that you automatically, when you reach this pinnacle moment of I have all this confidence, I am my best version of myself, nobody can tell me anything, and that's it. And I think that's a false narrative, because we go through so many different life changes and so many different experiences. We meet so many different people in our lives, and different circumstances come which can affect and impact our confidence. And so I think getting grounded in the fact that it's a journey that is going to ebb and flow and going to be a roller coaster, but also have its beautiful moments and low moments, is something that's like, but I think even in that, remembering your worth. I think this idea of, even when other people, when my boss had, maybe questioned my worth, and it was at that moment that I didn't realize, like, okay, am I worthy of this? Like, am I worthy? It's whether someone's saying, am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of pursuing this business, or trying to go for this promotion, or stepping out on faith and doing something I've never done before? It's like, no, I am. And maybe right now someone else is not saying that. Maybe right now I'm not hearing that enough, but at least let me tell it to myself.
Yeah.
And so whether like I have this random box, I'm not trying to promote a brand, but I do have this box of like little box of badass.
I love her book. Her book is
right,
awesome.
right. I have all these little knickknacks. I have a mug that says "Be your own boss,"
Yeah.
and so like those ideas of those positive affirmations, even if you're putting it around your space, on your fridge, on your wall, when you wake up, have it as a background on your phone or something that is that little reminder, even when you yourself doubt it. But seeing that, I'm very much a believer in like seeing and stating those type of statements. So I would say that is probably the most important thing. And I think secondly, we as women, especially as we as Black women, we are the definition of resilience. But it's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because like we continue to rise despite the obstacles that we face and endure. But sometimes it's a curse because we put so much burden on ourselves and we put so much weight and so much of a load, especially if it's not just our problems, but other people's problems. We put that and we carry that because we either always want to help and support somebody else and maybe put that in front of our own needs. And so this idea of resiliency, but being resilient, but remembering to recharge. It's like resilient, but also recharge. And recharge shouldn't be something that is seen as negative, whether it's the form of self-care. And it's like, it shouldn't be a negative term that we as women, especially Black women, say like, oh, well, I feel like I'm being cocky or I'm spoiling myself or things like that. It's like, no, why not? Like literally take moments to recharge and not feel guilty in that. And so I think it's like, honestly, unplug that, laptop, unplug, don't respond to that email right now, wait till the next day, watch that TV show, eat that meal, spend some time with your girlfriends or your kids or your partner, or just like going out, watching a movie by yourself, even though that is, I think it's like give ourselves room to recharge, even in this midst of we are resilient and we continue to, thrive and have that faith. But I think for us to remember that like it's something that's a key and point. So I think the idea of going on that journey to building confidence, recharging, and then having those type of like positive affirmations, even if no one else necessarily says that about you, but having it around for yourself.
Yeah, ultimately taking care of yourself, like you're saying. Yes, absolutely. And lastly, how do you own your identity every single day?
Yeah, well, I love some Ruby Woo red lipstick from but I typically love, like, I think one thing that I definitely like, as I'm embracing more authentic self in my own way, like I think I've realized that my vocation, not just my purpose, but my vocation is the empowerment of girls of color. And so for me, I've realized that no matter what I do, if I don't necessarily have my business anymore, I'm not working at my company doing that role, like I know from myself and just what I've just connected with God, that like that is something I want to continue to do in any type of role that I'm in. And so I think being grounded in like what I stand for or care to fight for or care to, that's why I appreciate you having this series and what you're doing to tell more narratives and stories, especially for other Black women, other females, to share them, to inspire the next one, because we need community and connection now so much more than ever. And so especially right now, it's like this can look on a better time. And I think for me, each and every day is just like I said, taking that moment to just read a scripture, get a positive affirmation, meet up with such amazing women who inspire me, and I'm just blown away by it. And also, like, when I get a chance to get my product or tell my business story in front of somebody who's like, man, like, I wish I had this growing up, or I'm so excited that my child is able to see themselves reflected in a doll that has hair like theirs, or that they didn't, that they haven't seen on shelves. And so I think that those are times that I'm just like, okay, God, you have me doing these things. You have me, pushing for this for a reason. And it's, some days are better than others, but like, there's a reason why I'm doing this. And so I think remembering your why, and even if you haven't discovered yet what that is, trying things to work on getting to where that is.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Well, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for
Yeah.
using yourself and your journey to inspire other women and provide representation, because I feel like that is so needed. Like you said, right
Yeah.
now in this time, in the state of the world, we definitely need all the representation that we can get.
Yeah, no, seriously, like this couldn't, like honestly, this couldn't have come at a better time. I'm sure the interviews you've been doing, and like, I don't know how many people have been able to make it to North Carolina,
Yeah.
but you know, glad it was able to be virtual. But I think stories are just like what really, really are gonna uplift people during the times that we're in. And I think like the work you're doing is just coming at such a just a really, really critical time. And so thank you as well for
Oh,
what you do.
of course. I gotta use myself, just create a
Yeah.
platform because it's
Yeah.
so needed. How can we keep up with you as far as on social media and your websites and everything to continue to be inspired by your journey?
Yes, absolutely. So absolutely follow my brand page at Courage Dolls. So CORAGEDOLLS. You can follow us at Courage Dolls on Facebook or Instagram or on our website at www.couragedolls.com. We have awesome books and pins that say because representation matters. So like I said, I love positive affirmations. And we also sell our, like I said, our dolls and books. We launched our first book, which teaches kids the early principles of entrepreneurship. And then if you want to follow my own personal page, definitely look me up at Flora Ekpe-Idang on Facebook, or look me up as well on Instagram or LinkedIn.
Yes, well, thank you so much. I'm excited to see everything that you're going to continue to do just in the community and everything.
Thank you so much. I truly, truly appreciated this.
Of course.